do the after the game shows, which he does, which is so good. Now it's so popular, they're going to do a pregame show. Isn't that right?
Yeah, all 16 games.
All 16 games. And so Ed loved it because he was getting paid for something he loved to. He went to the football games anyway, and he loved to talk about the games. But in Philly Magazine, they have some pictures. And one of the pictures is, first of all, a picture of Ed Rendell on the cover, Rendell for president. Who knows? A lot of people say, they see this, they say, oh, your buddy's running for president.
Not a chance.
Yeah, because they know I supported Ed in every election. In the,
no question.
77 for DA, 81 for DA, 91 for mayor, 95 for mayor, 2002 for governor, and 2006 for governor. So those are the 246 elections. But this picture with, I'll put it up here, so Governor Rendell and Hillary Clinton, she says, Ed, you can whisper in my ear anytime. I can't thank you enough for your support and friendship. All the best, Hillary. And it's signed too. And that's because April 22nd primary, Ed Rendell, he took all over the state. I remember he came to Temple University, and I thank you for appointing me to the Board of Trustees of Temple. So I was there. And Hillary, I think I agree with everything Governor Rendell said. She was a wonderful first lady. She was a fantastic U.S. Senator, first round in 2000. And in 2000, I wanted Ed Rendell to run for U.S. Senate, but he says, no, I don't want to be a legislator. And he says in the book why he doesn't want to be a legislator. He likes the action. And, he's right. I had Governor Graham on, and any governor I had on the show that became a U.S. Senator said they didn't like being senator. They loved being the...
and Bob, for our radio audience,
the governor.
The picture, I'm leaning over, whispering something in Hillary's ear, and I have sort of a smirk on my face. And she has a little bit of smirk on her face. And what I'm saying, this was in Harrisburg at a rally, and Mayor Steve Reed, who was a great mayor of Harrisburg but was long-winded, I think I was saying to Hillary, relax, this guy's a little bit of a windbag.
That's funny. But I like when you bring out in the book and you learn things, because I like to know everything of politics as all of you do. I like when you said, when Bill Clinton asked you to come to the White House and he appointed you a Democrat national chairman, and that's something your dad would have been proud of, you being DA, mayor, and governor. But the most thing you would have been proud of is you being the national chairman of the Democrat National Party, because he loved Franklin Delano Roosevelt and he loved the Democrats.
And Adlai Stevenson.
And Adlai Stevenson.
It's interesting, Bob. You're absolutely right. My dad never was in politics. He wasn't even a committeeman. He was a businessman, and he worked awful hard. In fact, he worked so hard he worked himself into an early grave. He lived through my 14th year, and he loved the Democratic Party. He believed they were the only hope for ordinary people. He loved FDR and really loved Adlai Stevenson. I said in the book, I got my start in politics with my dad tacking up Stevenson posters. And then I said the only time in 14 years that I saw my dad cry, about 9 o'clock on election night, 1952.
Stevenson lost to Eisenhower.
Right. We were out at a grocery store, and in those days there were no television returns. But on radio, the guy said, and it looks like General Eisenhower has carried enough states to assure his election as president. And as we were walking back the 2.5 blocks from the grocery store at night, I saw for the first and last time this strong, big, proud man with tears pouring down his eyes. And so I said in the book, I got my interest in politics, honestly.
And when you talk about your dad crying, I love and I read every word of this book because you're my friend, and I love politics.
And you love politics. And
I love you too, and I'm proud of you. But I like when you talked about tears came to your eyes when Bill Clinton brought your Democrat National Committee staff to the White House and thanked them because they made possible 23 million new jobs, 4 million Hope scholarships, and a lot of other things. Tell us about that.
Well, interesting story. Right after Al Gore lost the recount and the Supreme Court decision to Bush, I got a call. I was the Democratic chairman from President Clinton. He was still in office. And he said, I'd like to come over like the second day in January, the first working day. He said, I'd like to come over and I'd like to address all the current members of the staff of the DNC and all of the recent staff members, particularly those who served the last 8 years. So I got everybody together in a room that probably fire code was no more than 120 people. We had about 225 people. It was in the middle of January, but it was hot as can be. People were sweating. And President Clinton got in there and he said to them, I know that sometime during the last 8 years, your family or your friends say, why do you do it? Why do you work for such low pay and such horrible working conditions in politics? And most of the people in politics are bums, they're corrupt. Why do you do it? And he said, if you can ask that again, tell them you did it to create 23.5 million jobs. Tell them that you did it to make sure that 4 million kids who never thought they could go to college got Hope scholarships that enable them to go to college. Telling you did it to save the lives of 1 million Muslim Kosovars. And he went on with the litany of all the things that the Clinton administration had accomplished. And he said, all those things you can take credit for, because without your hard work and dedication, myself and Al Gore never get elected in 92 and don't get reelected in 96. And not only was there not a dry in the house, Bob, but for those young people, it was a justification of how they had spent 1 year, 2 years, 8 years of their lives. And you could see them just floating on air.
Right. And Governor Rendell brings out how his relationship with Bill Clinton not only helped the Democrat Party, but more important, it helped Philadelphia. For instance, when the IRS building was going to be closed, there were 10 IRS buildings that were closing, a lot of them. Ed Rendell met with him in a car and wrote some things down, why they should keep it, and he reversed the decision. Isn't that right?
It's a great story.
Go ahead.
They hadn't made the decision yet, but the rumors are that we were on the chopping block. I think there were 14 IRS centers, and they were going to go down to 10, and we were on the chopping block. So I asked him, he was coming in, flying in. I said, can I ride in from the airport with the president? And they said yes. And I said, Mr. President, I know you've got a tough decision on consolidating these IRS centers. It's 4,000 jobs, and it's pretty meaningful for us, and I'd like you to look at this. And I gave him a card, and on that card there were 2 columns. And the first column had the numbers 9%, 20%, and 81%. The second card had the same column, and it was like 2%, 7%, and 36%. And the president said, well, I don't understand. What are these figures? I said, the first column is Philadelphia. The second column is Boise, Idaho, who also has an IRS center. I said, the first number is unemployment, percentage of unemployment. It's 9% in Philadelphia, 2% in Boise. Second number is poverty rate. It's 20% in Philadelphia, 7% in Boise. And he said, what's the third number? I said, that's the percentage of vote you got in the 92 election. 81% in Philadelphia, 36% in Boise. Case closed.
And you're a good lawyer. You won your case.
We won the case, and the IRS center is still there, and an awful lot of Philadelphians are employed in good, well-paying, secure jobs.
And I'll tell you a couple of Ed Rendell stories that aren't in there that you could put in your next book. For instance, we love the Constitution Center. It's one of the best awesome museums in the country.
If it was in Washington, it would be the most popular building in the country.
Exactly. And you've been so I was in the car one time. You were going, we had a fun an event for you in New York at the Metropolitan Club, and I asked you for a ride. And in the car, the Governor Rendell, then he was Mayor Rendell, was always working. The year, it was whatever, about 1990. It was in the 90s.
Late 90s.
Yeah. So you were calling Arlen Specter. You were calling the senators, and Arlen helped you get the federal money. But you put this thing together to get about $150 million. Isn't that right?
Right. I mean, we got $61 million from the federal government. The state gave us money. The city gave us a little. I mean, I was the mayor then. But most importantly, then we went out and raised it in the private sector. And the Constitution Center is awesome. Interestingly, Yogi said deja vu all over again. Well, at Jerry Lenfest, the great philanthropist, Philadelphia's been very lucky to have incredible philanthropists who cared about the city and the region. Walter Annenberg and Lee Annenberg, the two great philanthropists, Dodo Hamilton, so many others. But Jerry Lenfest has given away close to $1 billion, most of it to Philadelphia institutions and organizations. And Jerry is head of the board of the hopefully new museum to the American Revolution. And I asked him to serve on the board, and he did, and he became chairman. He's given $40 million of his own money to the effort. The state has pledged $30 million, but we need about another $60 million to go. And I agreed to be the chairman of the capital campaign. So I'm back again raising money for a Philadelphia museum, but it's going to be spectacular. I mean, people don't know the story of the American Revolution. And I say in the book that we Americans back then were the ultimate risk takers. I mean, think about it for a second. We were shopkeepers and farmers. We had no army. Only one state had militia, and you know who that was? Ben Franklin, they were called the Associators. No one else had even a permanent militia. And we dared to take on the greatest army and the greatest navy in the world, the British Army and the British Navy. It was like Appalachian State beating Michigan in football. We carried out an upset that nobody thought was possible. In fact, the great patriot John Dickinson in the Congress, he led the forces who said, stay with England, let's try to get the king to redress our grievances, not because he liked the king, but because he didn't believe we had a snowball's chance to win in a revolution. And it's an interesting story to tell you why we need to build this magazine. I don't know if people know about John Dickinson. He led the forces against independence. John Adams led the forces for independence. It came down to the day before the final vote. The vote, as you know, was not July 4th, it was July 2nd. And if Dickinson had voted, Pennsylvania would have been tied. And the rule was we wouldn't become independent. We wouldn't go to war unless it was unanimous among the states. And a tie vote would have meant no independence. So Franklin and Jefferson went to Dickinson on the 1st and said, John, we know how you feel. We're not going to ask you to vote against your conscience. But you also know that the people of Pennsylvania want independence. So why don't you just not show up tomorrow for the vote? Dickinson thought about it. He agreed that the people wanted him to vote for independence, but he couldn't do it. So he stayed home. It carried in Pennsylvania by 4-3, and as a result, we went independent. And John Dickinson, the next day, resigned from the Continental Congress. But unlike a lot of people who wanted to stay as part of Great Britain, he didn't go back to England. He didn't become a Tory sympathizer. The day that he resigned, he went and enlisted in the newly formed Continental Army. So he disagreed violently with the decision, but when the decision was made, he enlisted in the Army and put his life on the line.
So who didn't come to vote? Dickinson
Stayed home. But think about that, right. And think about it in terms of modern-day politics, where people disagree and won't even see each other on the street, won't even talk to each other. Dickinson disagreed, but joined the other side and fought for this country. And by the way, fought very ably. He was an officer in the Army and fought very ably. And fortunately, later on, after he died, he's recognized, of course, with our great Dickinson University and our great Dickinson Law School, Lou Katz.
Right, Dickinson Law School, one of the oldest law schools in the nation.
The Katz building.
I have a good friend, and is one of the Governor Ed Rendell's best friends now. And by the way, this is Bob Rovner. We're proud to join you every Friday, 12 to 1, and we're so proud that our guest today is Governor Ed Rendell, who I supported, DA, mayor, governor, and that's one of the stories Lou Katz.
Right, and we're on PCN, don't forget.
We're on PCN and that's good because Dave Cohen was his chief of staff, one of the most ablest chief of staff of all times. I want to get into that, and I want to get to talk about Lou Katz for a minute. But there's a great chapter when you became mayor, the city was going bankrupt, and it was Dave Cohen, you, Tom Knox, helped save the city.
Alan Davis.
You saved hundreds of millions of dollars. They were paying $36 a foot for rent. You got it down to $20 a foot. They
$7.
Fought the unions who threatened who went against you in 1995. You ran for re-election, but you still got over 80% of the vote.
Right. I was the first Democratic mayor to have all 4 municipal unions endorse his opponent when I ran for re-election. But interestingly, the union members knew that I had saved their jobs, even though we had to have benefit concessions and work rule changes and wage freezes. And they voted for me because in that election in 81, Bob, I carried every precinct in the city, every voting district, and many of them were majority firemen and their families, policemen and their families. I still carried those districts.
Some 400 to 14, so it was a big. And the Northeast, Center City, they all knew and loved the Rendell every election.
And it was great. And I think that demonstrates that you can, in fact, do tough and difficult things and still get reelected. Another example of that was when I became governor.